Welcome to Pub Sports Radio, Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. It's another edition of the show, Thursday, January 7th. And for the first time this season, we have an NFL playoff edition. Yeah, NFL playoffs, baby. They're here. I'm fired up, can you tell? Yes. Games that matter, not that games haven't mattered to this point, but now we're at the good stuff. Pressure's there. Win, you move on. Lose, you're sent packing and you go home and your season is over. This is the kind of stuff we love. NFL playoff time. Cannot wait. Looking forward to the wild card weekend getting underway. Of course, as the NFL is calling it, super wild card weekend because of the fact for the first time in NFL history since the wild card format started, which I believe was in 2000 or 1999, I believe, or 2000. Right around that time is when the wild card format was introduced. But for the first time ever, we have a triple header of wild card games on Saturday and Sunday. Of course, for years, we've become accustomed to 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday on wild card weekend. This weekend, we've got extra football to look forward to. 3 games on Saturday, 3 games on Sunday because of the extra team in each conference that got into the playoffs. So I'm definitely looking forward to breaking these games down here. Wild card weekend. My betting approach changes just a little bit at playoff time. I don't bet probably as many player props in the playoffs because it can be dicey. Defenses sometimes can turn up the screws a little bit. But as far as side and total bets for me, I incorporate teasers probably a little bit more in the playoffs than I do in the regular season because we are talking about sharp lines, and I will mention a few teams that I think are good teaser bets in a 2-team 6-point teaser this weekend in Wild Card Weekend. So looking forward to breaking down these games. Thanks to everyone in the chat for joining me. Let's get into it. And what I love about only having these 6 games this weekend is we can take our time, we can discuss them, we can really analyze them and dissect them. As always, we're going to go in schedule/rotation order. We're going to start with the first game out of the chute, Saturday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, the Indianapolis Colts and the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo right now, 6.5-point favorites at home, the consensus number, 51 the total in this game. And the motto and the theme, I think, for this game for me, when I look at it, is the natural progression. And I think we are going to see that on Saturday for the Buffalo Bills. The natural progression. A team that has tasted bitter defeat in playoffs past, a quarterback in Josh Allen who has tasted bitter defeat in playoffs past. Didn't end well. We remember the Houston wildcard game, of course, just last season. A game where the Buffalo Bills just dominated the game early in the first half, screwed up repeatedly in the second half. Defense got worn down. Offense, and Josh Allen included, started turning the football over. And the Houston Texans and Deshaun Watson came back to take that wild card victory over the Buffalo Bills. When you lose in the playoffs a couple of years in a row, albeit the first time that they lost in the playoffs, that with the year that the Bills lost at Jacksonville in the wild card round, that was Tyrod Taylor, the quarterback that year, not Josh Allen. But the bottom line is, when you have some disappointments at playoff time, you sometimes come back stronger, come back better. You learn from what happened in the past. You learn from tough losses. There are so many countless examples of that. Look at Virginia in college basketball. They lose in the first round to the 16 seed UMBC, and they bounce back the next year, win the national championship. Look at the Tampa Bay Lightning in the NHL. They get bounced and swept in 4 straight by the Columbus Blue Jackets in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs 2 years ago. What did they do last year? Come all the way back, bounce back strong, learn from their mistakes, learn from the disappointment, are better and stronger athletes because of the setback, and they come back and win the Stanley Cup. There's going to be a couple of teams I talk about in this weekend's wild card games where I think they're ready to take that next step after suffering setbacks, after suffering disappointment in playoffs past. And I think the Buffalo Bills are one of those teams. So now let's look into the matchup now for the Bills here. Let's talk about the Colts defense, first of all, because obviously that's the biggest concern if you're a Colts fan going into this game, because you're playing a high-powered offense, an offense that was a juggernaut down the stretch of the season, could not be stopped, a Buffalo offense that is putting up 400 plus yards, it seems, on a weekly basis. That's able to put up 30s in points down the stretch like they did. 56 against Miami, 38 against New England, 48 against Denver, 34 against San Francisco, 26 against a pretty damn good Steeler defense as well. It's just an offense that's been blistering hot down the stretch. It's a reason why Buffalo ended the season with 6 straight wins, 6 straight point spread covers, entering this wild card playoff game. They're surging on all cylinders right now, firing on all cylinders, this Bills offense. The Colts defense, what can they do about it? Remember early in the season, I believe I think it was the first 4 weeks of the season, and the Colts were 3-1. They had gotten off to a really, really good start, and everybody was talking about this is one of the elite defenses in the NFL. And people were just so impressed with Indianapolis defensively. The pass rush wise, the ability to stop the run, which was very good, and the ability to lock down of the passing game. And the first 4 weeks, bore that out, that they were playing really good defensive football. But you look at the opponents and you look at the quarterbacks. Week 1, it was Jacksonville, Gardner Minshew. Then it was Minnesota, who's had a disappointing season. Kirk Cousins, the Jets with Sam Darnold back in September. It was Chicago when Chicago's offense wasn't good at that time when they played Chicago October the 4th. It was only late in the season the Bears offense got going. So the bottom line is the Colts defense got that rep for, wow, what a top 5 defense. Yeah, they got it against not a very impressive slate of opposing offenses, not a very impressive slate of opposing quarterbacks, and it made their defensive stats look a little bit not phony, I'll say. It's to me, they're a good defense, but to me, to say they were an elite defense, they were one of the best defenses in the NFL, I think was false. And what have we seen from the Colts defense since then against playoff teams? They give up 32 to Cleveland, 24 to Baltimore, 31 to Green Bay, 45 to Tennessee, 28 to Pittsburgh. And they gave up 28 to Pittsburgh, by the way, just a couple of weeks ago, when the Steelers' offense was just in the doldrums prior to that matchup against the Colts. Remember, they got shut down by Washington. They had trouble scoring against a banged-up, COVID-19 depleted Baltimore team and got shut down by Buffalo, too, in that Sunday Night Football game. That was Pittsburgh's offense prior to playing the Colts. Then they played the Colts, and all of a sudden, here's Pittsburgh erasing a big early deficit and just doing whatever they wanted. And Ben Roethlisberger, deep down the field, picking apart the Colts secondary. That's a vision I can't get out of my mind. It really isn't, because they allowed that to Pittsburgh when the Steelers' offense was damn near broken for 2 or 3 games in a row at least. That worries me significantly for the Colts defense here against Buffalo's offense. What also worries me is that the Colts secondary, of course, has not had Malik Hooker all year. And I think especially when you're talking about the Colts pass defense, I think you can make a fair assessment and say he's probably the best they've got in terms of their pass defense. But then the next best player in that secondary is a guy that didn't play last week against Jacksonville due to injury. And if you look at current injury reports, it's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination that he's going to be back for this game. And I'm talking about Rocky Ya-Sin for the Indianapolis Colts. He's arguably their best cornerback, didn't play last week against Jacksonville. And in the second half of that game, now in the first half, the defense was pretty solid. But in the second half of that game, Mike Glennon's throwing the foot. Mike Glennon, folks, not anywhere close to a Josh Allen caliber quarterback. Mike Glennon is throwing the football all over that Colts secondary last week in the second half of that game. And again, with Rocky Ya-Sin out, that's a significant injury absence for the Indianapolis Colts. He is still in concussion protocol. Last word. I just read that yesterday. Very, very, very questionable to play on Saturday. Very much up in the air. And in fact, with him still being up in the air, and concussion. My honest belief is he's probably not going to play. He might try to fight through it, but you know what it's like with concussion protocol. You know what it's like with head injuries. You need to really show signs that you're on the mend, that you're improving before you play. And if he doesn't play Sunday against this Bills team, which is just throwing the football, that Josh Allen has been laser sharp, pinpoint accurate for the last several weeks. He's getting all of his receipts. Now, Stephon Diggs is obviously the guy. He has been, it's not just good, he has been unbelievable. There's not even enough praise and enough words in the English language that I can use to express just the incredible job that Stephon Diggs has done for the Buffalo Bills offense and for that receiving core, particularly down the stretch. But it ain't just him. He's the star. He's got a good supporting cast. Cole Beasley, John Brown, Gabe Davis, the rookie, has really stepped up out of Central Florida. Dawson Knox, a solid tight end. There's weapons galore for the Buffalo Bills offense against a Colts defense that lived off a phony defensive stat line in the early part of the season that they built up against weaker teams. And you look at their results defensively against every playoff team that they've faced this season, and it's not that same defense. They've given up plays. They've given up points. And they're going to be really tested by this Buffalo team. A Buffalo team that's, I think, got extreme focus, laser focused. They came out there in what was essentially a game that didn't mean a whole lot to them last week against Miami. And they said, you know what, Miami? We're going to be that bully that just beats you up, takes your lunch money, and stuffs you in the locker and ends your season in the process. That's what the Bills did last week to the Miami Dolphins. The incentive to win that game for Miami was 1,000,000 times more than it was for the Buffalo Bills. And Buffalo just said, we're going to shut that shit down. What a tremendous performance last week by the Bills. Domination over a team that needed that win like oxygen in their lungs. That's how they needed it just as badly as a human being needs oxygen to breathe. And the Buffalo Bills just completely dominated that football game. So I've got concerns about the Colts defense. I know up front they're solid, but the Buffalo Bills offensive line, in terms of O-line improvement from week 1 to the end of the season, I don't know if there's an offensive line that's improved more from the start of the season to the end of the season than the Bills. They're giving Allen time. He's got not getting the sacks he was early in the season. Remember in Allen's rookie season with the Bills, they had a brutal offensive line. It was awful. It was clear as day that Brandon Beane, the GM, had to address that position. The O-line was just not good enough, not even satisfactory, quite honestly, in the early part of Josh Allen's career here with Buffalo. But boy, have they fixed it. They have done. The offensive line has improved by leaps and bounds. And when you look at the Colts, there's still a chance that they could be a little bit shorthanded. On DeForest Buckner, we're always asking ourselves every week, is he going to play going into this game for the Colts? Every week we ask ourselves that. That would be significant if he doesn't. I worry about the secondary. There's just a lot of concerns for me with Indy's defense. So let's flip it over now. Colts offense versus the Bills defense. This is the matchup I don't feel quite as confident in with Buffalo. Now, I will say this about the Bills defense. They got better down the stretch. You trace back to the bye week they had. And prior to the bye week that the Bills had, their defense was really starting to struggle and really not playing well, not playing anywhere close to the way they did last year or 2 years ago. They were struggling to giving up big plays. They were not stopping the run whatsoever. They have shored up the defense since the bye week. They played a lot better on the defensive side of the football. They've held Chargers to 17, San Fran to 24, and a lot of those 24 San Fran points were in garbage time when the Bills let their foot off the gas. 15 to Pittsburgh, 19 to Denver, 9 points allowed to New England, 26 to Miami. Again, a lot of those points came with the backups playing in the second half of that game. Remember, Josh Allen, most of the starters came out after halftime, exited the game, and it was mostly Bills defensive backups in the second half. Hell, there were some defensive backups playing from the start of the game for Buffalo, and they still pretty much kept Tua Tagovailoa and the Dolphins offense in check for over a half. So this Bills defense is significantly improved, and here's my concern now. Phillip Rivers, old guy, short week, set a Sunday game last week indoors to now a Saturday afternoon game. I've talked about this. Brady, Breeze, Ben, Rivers, all of these older quarterbacks, shorter week, less time to rehabilitate and have that arm strength where it needs to be. I worry about that. Ryan Dow in the chat mentioning it. Noodle arm Rivers. Yes, noodle arm Rivers. I'm worried about that here. This is a short week for a guy that needs optimally a full week to just have your arm be where it needs to be. The Bills defense, pressure-wise, is getting back to getting pressure on quarterbacks. They got to Tua a few times last week. Their sack numbers have improved. Their pressures of opposing quarterbacks have gone up in the last few games of the season. And I'm telling you what, Anthony Costanzo, don't sleep on that absence for the Indianapolis Colts. One of the premier left tackles in the NFL, missed last week, season over. There's been some shuffling going on that Colts offensive line. Can they get a combination that's going to work and protect Rivers here against what's been down the stretch a much improved, reinvigorated, revitalized Buffalo pass rush and Buffalo defense overall? Here's my grave concern, though, for the Bills. They've still shown at times issues against the run, issues stopping the run, and Jonathan Taylor has really run the football well for Indy the last few weeks of the season. If they get the run game going and keep Rivers in these short down and distance situations, Bills could have some trouble on their hands on the defensive side of the football if that's the case. They have had trouble against the run a lot this season. Taylor's running it well right now with the Colts in good form. That's the critical area. If the Colts run the football, they can maybe have some success offensively here. If they can't, and it's all under the arm of Rivers, it's game over and it's season over because he is not carrying this team in the passing game. Just no way. On the road, not happening. Rivers gets a break here in terms of the weather. Rivers is at his best indoors, warm weather. He is not a cold weather guy. He's not a guy and he's probably one of the worst quarterbacks you could imagine, because he's not got the greatest amount of arm strength in the world. He is probably the worst quarterback you could possibly want in a game with wind, when you've got to really have a strong arm to throw that sucker through a driving wind. Well, guess what? He's not going to have to worry about that. If you look ahead to what the forecast is going to be on Saturday for this game between the Colts and Bills, it looks like it's going to be partly cloudy, temperatures around 32, 31 Fahrenheit, which is not bad at all for early January in Western New York, and very little wind. So Phillip Rivers catches a break in that regard. He's not going to have to worry about wind or troubling weather conditions going into this game against the Buffalo Bills. Here's the way I see it, though. I like the Bills -6.5. I like the Bills in a teaser as well. I'm playing it both ways. I'm going to have Buffalo in a teaser along with another team here on Wild Card Weekend, and I'll mention who that is later on. I like the Bills in a 6-point teaser down to pick 'em -0.5 point, and also liking a Buffalo -6.5 here to get the job done. I just think it's their time. It's time. They've been too strong. They've been too good. Their only losses this season were to Tennessee and Kansas City. And think about when they played Tennessee and Kansas City, when their schedule was getting thrown completely off kilter by Tennessee's COVID issues, which bumped the Tennessee game back a lot. And then it bumped the Kansas City game back to Monday night, and they had a short week to prepare for the Chiefs. Oh, yeah, and they're two of the better teams in the AFC. So I don't think you can fault the Buffalo Bills for those losses that they suffered this season. Oh, and they lost to Arizona. I keep forgetting that one. Yeah, 13-3 they were straight up. So those were their 3 losses. There's not a bad loss in the mix. And if not for a Hail Mary, then their only losses were Tennessee and Kansas City, when their schedule, when I thought the NFL dealt them a bad hand, when they played Tennessee and Kansas City. Their schedule is getting screwed up. They're having to play these Tuesday games and then a Monday game at 5 p.m. Eastern, less than a week to prepare for the juggernaut Kansas City Chiefs. How's that fair to the Buffalo Bills? So you have to put obviously they didn't play well enough to win in those games, but it's not like the schedule and the situation set up well for the Buffalo Bills going into those games against Tennessee and Kansas City. I think they get the job done here. But I do I don't know. I feel like I need to maybe consider a hedge situation as well here, because I'm kind of doubling up here. I like Buffalo -6.5, and I like them on a teaser as well. But I'm not convinced the Bills completely shut down the Indy offense, because I think they might be able to run the football well. So the Colts team total, betting that over is an option for me. Because guess what? If the Colts cover this point spread, this is not going to be a low-scoring game. If the Colts cover, they're going to have to score points. All right? They are not covering this game and holding Buffalo below 21 or 24 points. To me, that's just not happening. If the Colts are going to cover this game, they're going to have to score. So I feel like the Colts team total over might still get there. But here's the issue for the Colts. Even if they do get to 24 points or so, which is possible, especially if they can run the football and the weather's not going to be as bad for Rivers, Buffalo, to me, can get 31-35 in this game against this Colts team. Because, again, you look at the absolute best offenses that the Colts have played this year. They didn't play Kansas City this year. They didn't play New Orleans this year. They played Green Bay. They gave up 31. They played Tennessee. They gave up 45 in that second meeting against the Titans. They gave up 32 to Baker Mayfield and the Browns, another playoff team. The Bills should, in my opinion, be good for 31-35 points. It also makes me look full game over as well in this one. So I don't like the Colts team total over, the full game over, which is currently 51. They're going to be bets, but they're going to be smaller bets. Primarily, I like Buffalo -6.5 and Buffalo in a teaser here when it comes to the Colts and the Bills. Let's move on now to the LA Rams and Seattle Seahawks. Seattle 3.5-point home favorites, 42.5 the total. Rams are getting healthier, and the betting markets are taking notice. The Rams have taken money in this game. They're down to 3.5. Andrew Whitworth, the left tackle, might be back. Looks like Cooper Kupp's coming off the COVID list. Going to play. Looks like Jared Goff is practicing, or at least trying to practice this week through that thumb injury for the Rams. Could be back and prevent them from having to start John Wolford again for a second straight game. That's definitely positives for the LA Rams. Does it change the outcome in this game is the question, because the Rams offense, I don't know if I trust them right now. Seattle's defense has truly transformed themselves, in the second half of the season. This is a really good defensive football team. Throw out everything we saw from the Seattle Seahawks late in the season. This is a team that is now getting it done early in the season with their defense. This is now a team that's finding ways to get it done on the defensive side of the football. So right now, the betting markets with Whitworth and Kupp and now Goff practicing, that's probably why we've seen the Rams money come in a little bit. There's belief that they're going to be healthy. They're going to have Goff back. I'll be honest, at this point, this may be crazy to say this, but John Wolford was serviceable last week. If they get Jared Goff back, remember, he's still got a thumb that even if he plays, that may not be 100%. Gripping the football, all of that stuff, having the feel of the ball, and having just the bite and the crispness and the velocity you need on your passes. Is that going to be there if he plays through that thumb injury? And the last time he played Seattle's defense, he didn't play well. It was an awful game for Jared Goff. Bad reads, bad interceptions, the turnover in the red zone was damn near unforgivable. You've got all the momentum. You're owning the time of possession. You've got Seattle's defense on their heels. You're moving the football well with a nice, healthy balance, run and pass. And then you throw that just hideous, awful red zone turnover, and it completely changed the game the last time they played Seattle. And the Rams never seemed to be able to recover from that. Now, the Rams defense is really, really outstanding. There's no doubt about that. Going into this football game, that is going to have to be the side of the football that carries the day for them, regardless of who's at quarterback. Doesn't matter if it's Goff, doesn't matter if it's John Wolford again. That's the side of the ball that's going to have to be good for the LA Rams in this game if they're going to win. And the Seattle offense hasn't necessarily been amazing, down the stretch. You look at the Seahawks offense, they've tried running the football more. I think that's part of it. So more times coming off the clock. There's not as much of those explosive plays down the field. So you have to keep that in mind with this Seattle team. I think it's a situation where, this plays out to be a very, very low scoring game, and it's indicated by where this total is right now, sitting in the 42.5 range right now with where this total is. I think that's exactly what we're going to see. The Seahawks offense was sluggish. The 49ers game last week, they were banged up on defense. Seattle has scored more than 23 points one single time since week 11. And that was against the Jets, when they put that big 40 spot on the board against the Jets. That's it. It's been play calling, I think, has been an issue. They've had offensive line injuries down the stretch. They're, like I said, they're running the ball more. They're taking the ball essentially out of Russell Wilson's hands, and it's kind of head scratching. Like, I understand the idea of trying to keep the offense balanced. I get it. I understand the idea and using, pretty good running backs here with the tandem of Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde. I get it. Those are a couple of solid running backs. You should be trying to run the football, but too many times they're taking the ball out of Russell's hands in these third down situations, especially 3rd and 3. 3rd and 3, they're almost always running the football lately, Seattle. Let him throw. This is Russell Wilson. This is a guy that has played at an MVP caliber level throughout much of his career. Let him have a chance to find. And you've got some pretty damn good receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. I find sometimes they're just a little bit too conservative and too willing to run the football here in this game. Or in a lot of games lately. So we'll have to wait and see. Pete Carroll is apparently saying that Brandon Shell and Mike Iupati, two enormous boosts they would be to this offensive line that, again, has had couple injury issues down the stretch, that they might be able to return for this game. Brandon Shell's the big one. He's the left tackle. He's a guy that, since really he's been out, that's really part of the problem why Seattle's offense just hasn't been the same the last few weeks. But starting to get a sense that he might be able to return for this game, which would be absolutely a significant boost and boon to the Seattle offense. No doubt about that. It's important. It's beyond important for Seattle to have a fully healthy offensive line. There's a chance it could happen. And if it does happen, it's really the first time since way back early in the season, for one of the few times since way back early in the season, they could have their offensive line fully intact and fully healthy in this game, which would help, in my opinion, against the Rams. Look, I understand the Rams support with the positive news for them, not COVID positive, but the good news for them, I should say. I've got to stop using positive in the good sense. Like it's great, it's positive, because now it's getting confused with positive news. What are you talking about, testing positive for this virus? No, I'm talking about good news for the Rams with their absences, Whitworth, with Kupp, with Goff practicing, all good news, and all probably why we're seeing some money come in on the Rams. All that being said, if this gets down to -3, I'm on the other side and looking at the Seattle Seahawks in this game. I don't trust Goff again against this defense. Goff couldn't solve the Seattle defense. And remember, it's a Seattle defense that's been bolstered significantly with Jamal Adams and Carlos Dunlap in the second half of the season. And I don't know if I necessarily like Jared Goff with a wonky thumb, even if he does play with still a wonky thumb on the road against a defense that pretty much devoured him. I like the under as well. I wouldn't even be frightened off betting it at like 42.5. Almost always I'm saying, you know what? I don't like betting unders when they're in the low 40s like that. It could get over the total by accident. You can get a pick six or a fumble return, scoop and score, a touchdown, which can completely blow up the under, even if it is a defensive slugfest, which I believe this will be. But I wouldn't talk you out of the under if you like it. I would only look in that direction. A 21-17 kind of game is definitely something I could see happening either way. But I'm going to kind of lean to Seattle here. I haven't bet it yet. I may not. I've got stronger thoughts on the other games than this one, but I lean under and I lean Seattle. And I will probably pull the trigger on Seattle if this hits 3 at any point. I just don't trust this Rams offense enough. I love the defense. Aaron Donald and company, outstanding. The defensive line can get after it. But A, Russell Wilson's mobile. He can get out of pressure. And B, as I mentioned, Seattle's offensive line could be at full strength and as healthy as they've been since maybe way back in early October for this game on Sunday. And that's going to give them at least a puncher's chance to keep this stout Rams defensive front away from Russell Wilson. So I like the under. And if this line creeps down a little bit further, I'm going to get interested in Seattle to get the win and covers. Tampa Bay, Washington now is the last game on Saturday's triple header slate in wild card weekend action. We've got the Buccaneers 8.5-point road favorites, 9 showing at bookmaker/Chris. The total bet down from 46.5 to 45 in this game on Saturday. This is a fascinating one because you've got this Tampa Bay offense, which, let's be honest, down the stretch, they look like they figured it out. Bruce Arians figured it out from a play calling and scheming standpoint. Tom Brady looked like he's grasped the system a lot better. All of these big-time weapons that are now multiple games in a row playing with each other. Evans, Godwin, Gronk, Brown, go on down the list. They're gaining more and more chemistry in terms of route running, in terms of where to go, where Tom Brady wants them to go with the football. All of this stuff, they're getting more cohesion. There's no doubt. And down the stretch, they look like the offense that a lot of people thought maybe this Buccaneers team could be, assuming old man Tom Brady still had some gas in the tank. And he showed that in the last few games. Let's give them credit. Down the stretch of the season, last few games, we saw them score 31 against Atlanta in a win, 47 against Detroit in a blowout win, 44 last weekend against Atlanta in the rematch against the Falcons. By far their 3 best offensive performances of the season. But I at least have to pump the brakes. Atlanta twice and Detroit, who were mangled from an injury standpoint on defense in that game, who are not a very good defense to begin with. And 2 teams that really struggle to get any sort of pressure and pass rush. You look at pass rush stats, Atlanta's way down in the bottom half of the NFL, and Detroit's damn near dead last in the NFL in terms of getting a pass rush and getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And all season long, the pattern with the Tampa Bay offense has been, don't get pressure on them, don't get pressure on Tom Brady. He picks you apart. And the Bucs offense works. Get pressure, blow up the line of scrimmage against Tom Brady and this Bucs offense. Not only do you have a chance to neutralize this offense, you have a chance to beat Tampa Bay. And the proof is in the pudding. All you got to do is look at the pattern. This has been as distinct and as obvious a pattern of results based on one singular matchup. A defensive line that can get pressure on Brady versus a defensive line that cannot get pressure on Tom Brady. There have been 2 distinctly different win-loss results for Tampa Bay this year based on that matchup. Because you look at the teams with no pass rush and a bottom feeder defense overall. Look at those teams that Tampa Bay faced. Carolina, win and cover, score 31. Denver, win and cover, score 28. Chargers, score 38 with a win. They pushed in that game. Green Bay, back when Green Bay's defense was injury-riddled and struggling, not playing as well as they did down the stretch, 38 points. Las Vegas, bad defense, no pass rush, 45 points for Brady and the Bucs in that game. What else? As I mentioned, Atlanta twice. Detroit, no pass rush, bad defenses. Those were the big wins. Those were the gaudy offensive numbers and the gaudy offensive performances for Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay offense. Now let's flip it. Games against pretty good defenses, and especially games against pretty good teams with good pass rushes and defensive lines that could get pressure, defensive lines that could blow up the line of scrimmage. How did the Bucs do in those games? Let's go down the list, and it's just as stark as it is their success against the teams with very little pass rush and weak defenses. Now the teams with a good pass rush and better defenses. Here's what happened. New Orleans lose 34-23. Chicago lose 20-19. Chicago, again, defensively, the pass rush is solid on that team. Lost that game. The New York Giants, they won, but the New York Giants have a capable enough defensive line, and they barely escaped with a 2-point win in that game. And for the first half of that Monday night game against the Giants back in early November, Brady was pressured. They got to him. They made life tough on him. He couldn't set his feet. He was not accurate. His completion percentage in the first half of that game was not good. That is something you have to factor in as well, even though they won that game. The Giants ruffled that line of scrimmage with their front seven, and it almost paid dividends for them. They fell just short and lost by 2. The Rams, they lose 27-24. And again, for much of that game, the pass rush and staunch defensive line of the Rams bottles them up. Kansas City, they got going late in the game, but for well over a half, pass rush, D-line made Brady uncomfortable. And that's exactly what we saw in that game. So there's your patterns. The Chiefs, the Rams, the Saints, the Giants, Chicago. And guess what the pattern is? Everybody outside of the Giants in that list I just named, with not only defensive lines that were good, defensive lines that could get a pass rush, every one of those teams outside of the Giants, they're playoff teams. Chicago, New Orleans, the Rams, all of these teams that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers struggled to protect Tom Brady against, and all of the teams that they lost to, either straight up or against the spread this year, or both. So translate that long diatribe into proper, non-long-winded English, which for me sometimes can be difficult. And the translation is, hell no, am I laying more than a touchdown with Tampa Bay in this game. Hell no. Not interested. The only question is, can we take Washington? They're getting 8.5. They're getting 9. They're not devoid of issues. The offensive line that they have is a work in progress. Skill position talent on this team isn't as deep as certainly as Tampa Bay's or a lot of other teams. But what we do see from Washington is them starting to get some of these key players back on the field the last couple of weeks, including, of course, Terry McLaurin last week. It was imperative to get him back last week. And what does he do? First game back against the Eagles in the game they've got to win to get in the playoffs and clinch the NFC East. He ends up getting a touchdown in his first game back. So having him back is significant. Having Antonio Gibson healthy at the running back spot is significant as well. I would expect him to play. I'm going to continue to, and remember, Terry McLaurin is playing through an ankle injury, and he's not practicing this week. Well, he didn't practice at all last week either. So to me, I have no reason to doubt that he's going to suit up in this game. I think he will. It's playoff time. It's do or die. He played pretty darn well, I thought, last week. Even if he is playing through this ankle injury last week, you saw the way he played. He played pretty well. Showed he was able to run the routes. He found his way. He found ways to get open for Alex Smith. So I would expect him to play here in this game. And the same thing here with Antonio Gibson. Yeah, he's got the toe injury still, and he's a little bit banged up, but he'll play through it. Alex Smith, not going to wow you. Sometimes he drives me nuts with just the short passing game all the time, the little dump offs, the little, out to the edge and try to get receivers open in space. They go to that well a lot. May not work well against Tampa Bay's defense, which really, sideline to sideline can do a pretty good job at negating what the Washington football team wants to do with that short passing game. But the fact remains that with this Washington group, there has been a spark lit for this team with Alex Smith coming back from that, near devastating, life-threatening, nearly career-threatening injury. With that storyline, with Ron Rivera, the head coach, returning to coach this team after surviving cancer, there is a feel-good element to this team they're tight-knit. They play their tail off every single week. It's not always pretty, but they've gutted their way to a 7-9 straight-up record. And Washington is one of those teams that coming into this game, Tampa Bay, has won 4 straight, but come on now, Minnesota, Atlanta, Detroit, Atlanta. Nope, not a single playoff team in that 4-game win streak to end the season for Tampa Bay. Think about that. Minnesota, Atlanta twice, and Detroit were the last 4 wins in the season for Tampa Bay. Think about that. Not a damn good team in that group. Washington, hey, they've been tested. Now, they started the win streak with a couple of cupcakes, Cincinnati, Dallas, but you beat Pittsburgh, you beat San Francisco, you hang tough with Seattle, and only lose by 5, and that was Haskins in that game. Again, Dwayne Haskins played against Seattle. They lose to Carolina, but again, the awful, putrid, pathetic, horrendous, terrible Dwayne Haskins was at quarterback in that game as well for the Washington football team against Carolina. They get Alex Smith back last week against Philadelphia. Yeah, it was close. And maybe Washington benefited from taking Jalen Hurts out and putting Nate Sudfeld in. And that, of course, got a lot of publicity this week. But they win. With Alex Smith at quarterback, Washington is 5-1 straight up this season. Not against the spread. That's straight up. Washington has won 5 of the 6 games started by Alex Smith this season. They pretty much, at least in those 6 games, not only have they won, but the one loss with Alex Smith was, I'm trying to see, it was the Detroit game, 30-27. Now, granted, losing to the Lions isn't good, but they only lost by 3. And Alex Smith played well in that game. And remember, Washington's defense had a couple key injuries in that game as well, which I think made things a little bit difficult for them on that side of the ball against the Lions. But you look at the way they finished down the stretch. Very, very strong. What do I have them at? 5-2 straight up, and 6-1 against the spread in their last 7 games. 5-2 straight up, 6-1 against the spread their last 7 games. This Washington team. I think they're in this game. If I'm betting it, I'm looking at home dog. And there's another thing to consider here. Home underdogs in the NFL playoffs have done well. I believe 4 out of the last 5 they've covered. You look at teams where they're only a 500 team. They're a 500 team or worse going into the playoffs, which Washington is. They're, of course, 7-9. But teams that are either a 500 team or below 500 going into the playoffs since 2002, when they went to the divisional format in 2002, 7 teams have made the playoffs with a record of 500, 8-8, or worse. Of course, that fits here with Washington. How have those teams performed? 6-1 straight up, 7-0 against the spread. No joke. Teams that have a 500 or worse record entering the playoffs, that make the playoffs, 8-8 or worse during the regular season, but in the playoffs, those 7 teams have done it in the last 18 years, made the playoffs with an 8-8 record or worse, and those teams are 6-1 straight up, 7-0 against the spread. It really, truly is a remarkable stat. And you know what it is? Teams come into these games against, they see the record, 7-9. It's going to be easy for us. We can win this game, guys. They get not complacent, but they think it's going to be easier than it really is. The other team, the team that is, the 8-8 or 7-9 or 6-10, whatever the case may be, that are in the playoffs, that they play the disrespect card. Everybody thinks we won this shitty, awful NFC East division, that we're no good. We're only here because we won a really, really bad division. Washington's going to just use all of that to fuel their effort here, that nobody's going to think we can win this game. They think we won a crap-ass division, and it was a crap-ass division, but they can use that as fodder, and we can show that the NFL world that we're a capable football team. And hell, we don't even need Washington to win the game. Just cover the number. They're getting 8.5, 9 in this game. And Tampa Bay, they haven't been favored by this many points once. Okay, they have been favored. They're favored. They're 8.5, 9 in this game, the Buccaneers. You look at their schedule this year, they have been favored by more than 9 twice this season. Twice. They were double digits at Detroit a couple weeks ago. They covered that, but you throw that in the garbage. Detroit was just, Matt Stafford got hurt that game. They had no defense. They had injuries on defense. They were out of the playoffs. Tampa Bay needed the win to clinch, and they covered. Good on them. Good on Tampa Bay. But the other game that they were double-digit favorites or favorites of 9 or more was against the Giants on Monday Night Football, and they barely got out of there with a win. 25-23, 2-point victory. Yeah, I like Washington here, plus the points. There's a lot of people that like Tampa Bay on a teaser. They might win the game. I'm not saying they won't. They might. They very well could. I wouldn't talk you out of betting the teaser, and certainly you can get them down to -2.5 below a field goal. So from a teaser strategy perspective, it makes sense to, if you like Tampa Bay, to put them on a teaser. But I'm not going to completely rule out them losing the game outright, straight up. I'm not. Not going to be easy for Washington offensively, because I think Tampa Bay defensively is going to be not the easiest matchup for them. But Scott Turner's done a good job calling plays, and I just think their defense with Chase Young, with Sweat, and everybody that can get pressure from that Washington front seven, they're going to have some success getting to Brady. And we know that it's not been the same Bucs offense when they can get pressure on Tom Brady, and I think that keeps Washington in the game. I like them plus the 8.5. Another game where I'd lean under. The numbers come down a bit, 45. It's tough to bet a Washington game over right now. They're playing with just no pace whatsoever. 5 straight unders to end the season for Washington. And here's the other issue with laying 8.5, 9 with Tampa Bay. You're laying more than a touchdown on the road against a defense that has held 7 straight teams to 20 points or less. And you're going to lay more than a touchdown to go against a team that has given up 20 points or less in 7 straight games. That's not easy to do. There is, to me, very little wiggle room for Tampa in this game. You know, even if they approach that 7, 10, even 13, 14-point margin of victory, you're going to be sweating it out the whole time. So for me, it's Washington here, plus the points. The angle certainly doesn't hurt our cause about the teams that have done very, very well in terms of 8-8 record or worse in the playoffs. They've been money makers, 6-1 straight up, 7-0 against the spread. That angle fits Washington here. Let's see if the football team can make this a game. I think it's quite possible they will. Baltimore, Tennessee, as we move over to Sunday's triple header. We've got Baltimore 3-point road favorites, 3.5 in some spots, 54.5 the total in this game. I mentioned Josh Allen and the Bills. It's time for some growth. You know, it's time for the natural progression to take hold. It's time to learn from the past playoff losses and finally win your first playoff game. I think that's going to happen with Buffalo this weekend, and I think it's going to happen here with Baltimore as well. And I think they're ready. I think Lamar Jackson is ready. Is he a polished passing quarterback yet? No, he is not, but he is definitely making strides, in my opinion, being that pocket passing quarterback. And I think you're going to see him play well here against a Tennessee defense that's quite honestly, absolutely pathetic at this point. I mean, even in the game last week against the Texans, you know, trying to nail down that division, they won it because they outscored Houston. They didn't win it because they had any sort of defense. And that's going to, at some point when you're facing playoff caliber teams, it's going to bite you. It's going to bite you that you can't stop the run, which Tennessee cannot. It's going to bite you that your secondary just absolutely stinks. And I know this is Lamar Jackson, and this is a passing game that for extended parts of the season hasn't always worked for Baltimore. I understand all of that. But we're seeing Lamar Jackson start to throw the football better and more accurately lately, and I think it's going to happen here against this Tennessee team. They're going to run amok, you know, with Jackson, J.K. Dobbins. There should be a great deal of success being able to run the football here in this game for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, here's the one just that one little pit of my stomach fear for Baltimore. They feasted on bad teams down the stretch. They have. They've really fattened up on some pretty bad football teams. Cowboys, Jaguars, Giants, Bengals. Giants were maybe the one decent team, and Cleveland. Cleveland was the good team that they beat. But, it's definitely a Baltimore team that they've feasted on some really, really poor competition and bad defenses. So we'll have to see what can happen here. Tennessee is weaker against the pass than the run, but they're still not great against the run. And I think in this particular situation here, Baltimore can still find ways to be able to run the football successfully going into this game. On the flip side, you look at Tennessee offensively. The secondary is good. They've gotten healthier down the stretch. The run defense for Baltimore, though, all of a sudden. Cleveland, remember, in Monday Night Football, ran the football extremely well against Baltimore. Calais Campbell is probably going to play in this game for Baltimore. Is he going to be fully healthy is a question mark. And you look at Derrick Henry in the regular season meeting, which Tennessee won, by the way, in overtime against Baltimore. And that's the issue. It's a playoff revenge game for Baltimore. They lost to Tennessee last year in the divisional round. They lost again to Tennessee in the regular season this year. It certainly would look like, that maybe, just maybe, Baltimore's just got a tough time matchup-wise against Tennessee here going into this game, which is certainly bears that out in the previous two results that we've seen. But I think Baltimore is peaking now. I just have not seen enough defensively from Tennessee to want to back them here again, even though they've won the last two against Tennessee. And I think in this particular situation, you're going to end up seeing Baltimore's offense have enough success throwing the ball this time. Look, this is an awful secondary. This is an awful secondary. Receivers are running wide open, uncovered, weekly, every week against this Tennessee secondary. All Lamar Jackson has to do is, run the ball a little bit. You got to keep the defense honest. Then when you have those opportunities to throw it, you should have some wide open receivers because Tennessee is going to sell out to load up the line of scrimmage, load up the box, shut down Dobbins, shut down Lamar's run game, and force him to throw. Well, this is the one team where Lamar Jackson could finally get the throwing going. He didn't throw the ball well early this season, but that's when they played Tennessee last. Yeah, he didn't throw the ball well last year at all. And that's when Tennessee beat Baltimore in the playoffs. I am buying into Lamar Jackson's. He's still got room for improvement. He is not there yet fully as a passing quarterback, not even close. But has he gotten better? Has he made strides? Has he gotten a little bit better in terms of the passing game, in the last month or so of the season? I truly believe he has. And if that development and that improvement throwing the ball continues here, the secondary is just so incapable for Tennessee of covering receivers that I've got to believe he's going to end up finding success throwing to whoever he ends up throwing to here in this game. Mark Andrews obviously has been a huge target at tight end. Miles Boykin has stepped up. Even Des Bryant, had a touchdown recently for them. Hollywood Brown finally had a touchdown sighting at receiver. It's not been the year I think a lot of people expected from him. I just think it's learning by failure, getting knocked down, finding a way to get back up again. And I like the kid's demeanor, Lamar Jackson. Team guy, focused, always talking about team, always talking about wanting to get better, wanting to win for his team. He learned the painful lessons of last year. It's growth time. Time to take that step forward. Much like Josh Allen with Buffalo, I think they'll take that step forward on Saturday. I think Lamar Jackson and the Ravens will take that step forward on Sunday, especially if this line is -3 and there's a sense that it's maybe even going to fall down to -3 a little bit in some spots. I would look to the Baltimore side. And as far as the total goes in this game, I know it's 54.5. I know it's high. And there's still people saying the Tennessee games just can't keep going over the total, can they? Well, they're 23-6 to the over in their last 29 games since Ryan Tannehill took over as the starting quarterback. And people concerned with how high the totals are in Tennessee games? Well, I'll ease your fears a little bit. We had a 58.5 total with Houston last week, 79 points. We had a 52 total with Green Bay in the snow game, 54 points went over the total. We had a 53.5 total Tennessee Detroit, only 71 points scored in that game. We had 54 total against Cleveland, 76 points. We had a 51.5 total with the Indianapolis game for Tennessee, 71 points. A 50.5 total in the first meeting against Baltimore. We got to 54 points. That went over the total. 48.5 in the first meeting against Indy. That went over the total. Majority of these in the 50s, and they're going over the total. Totals of in the 50s this year for Tennessee games, by the way. I'm doing the math right now. 8-1 to the over. Tennessee games, Tennessee totals lined in the 50s this season, 8-1 to the over. So even in the 50s, we have seen that these totals just aren't high enough. And I think Baltimore's offense is going to work here against a terrible defense in Tennessee. But I don't think Baltimore's defense is completely shutting down Tennessee, because you look at their defensive numbers the last few weeks. Brandon Allen and the Bengals, a hobbled Daniel Jones and the Giants, Gardner Minshew / Mike Glennon and Jacksonville. The last good offense they played Baltimore was Cleveland, and Cleveland got 47 on them. Now, I don't know if Tennessee is going to get 47 on them. Tennessee might win the game if they score 47 in this game against Baltimore's defense. But you get my point. And they gave up 30, this Baltimore defense, to Tennessee in the first meeting between these two teams. So as good as the Raven defense is, and I think they're certainly the better defense than the Titans, but against the really, really good offenses, Baltimore has not shut you down. So there's going to be points in this game in my mind. We'll go over the total here of 54.5 as well with the Ravens and the Titans. Again, I've just been betting Tennessee over every single week, and 9 times out of 10 it's cashed. 9 times out of 10 it's worked. So I'm going to stick with it here in this game. All right, we move on. We're down to our last 2 games on Sunday. Chicago Bears, New Orleans Saints. New Orleans 10-point home favorites, 47 the total in this game. Chicago falls into that betting angle I mentioned before. 7 teams that have made the playoffs with an 8-8, 500 record or worse. Those teams are 6-1 straight up, 7-0 against the spread. That means bet Chicago in this game if you believe that angle. I am not going to do that with Chicago, unlike the Washington game. And here's why. Chicago's offense, all the rage down the stretch. What a resurgence. What a turnaround from early in the season for Mitch Trubisky and the Bears offense. And granted, it was a great turnaround. Like, this team wasn't supposed to be a team you would expect to put up 30, 36, 33, and 41 points in 4 straight games like they did when Trubisky came back as the starting quarterback. But they did. And the offense played a faster pace. They were letting Trubisky scramble out of the pocket, roll out of the pocket a lot more, make plays with his feet, throw on the run, all of that stuff that for some reason the Chicago Bears play calling was not letting him do that earlier in the season. And that ended up being a problem here for Chicago. No question about that. However, then we saw the Green Bay game last week with Chicago. They still get into the playoffs because Arizona lost, but to control their own destiny and punch their playoff ticket with a win, the offense didn't work as well. 16 points. Trubisky made mistakes. The pocket wasn't as clean for him against Green Bay as it was the previous 4 games where they put up those big numbers and big points. And it wasn't the same Chicago offense. And again, he made those critical mistakes that sometimes Trubisky makes. And that's my issue with Chicago going into this game, because those were mistakes against Green Bay's defense. Well, New Orleans has a defense that's even superior to Green Bay. And I worry about those mistakes coming to fruition again for Trubisky. And again, when you talk about the 4-game resurgence for the Bears offense, you're talking about games against Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville. Not a single good defense in that group. Not a one. And that is where the Chicago offense came. That's where the Chicago offensive success and resurgence came against the Jaguar defense, the Viking defense, the Texan defense, and the Lion defense. Defenses that I think Boston Nick MMA, Stephen Dollery, and me and a bunch of others in the chat could strap on our helmets, strap on our shoulder pads, strap on our knee pads, and be able to make plays running and throwing the football against those 4 defenses. I think that's exactly what we could have done against those 4 defenses: Minnesota, Houston, Detroit, and Jacksonville. Those were the 4 teams that Chicago exploded offensively against. So that's the issue. They haven't shown they can do it against an elite defense or even a good defense. And last week they faced a good defense in Green Bay, couldn't do it. And that is going to keep me off betting Chicago here, even though they fall into that angle of 6-1 straight up, 7-0 ATS teams that enter the playoffs with a 500 or worse record, which is unbelievable. That stat is unbelievable because first notion is let's bet against these teams that barely squeaked into the playoffs, that have a bad record, because they just don't belong here. And all they do is they end up winning the games and covering the number. That's an unbelievable stat. But I worry about the matchup here for Chicago. I worry about whether that offense can work against the Saints defense. And on the flip side, Chicago's secondary was really riddled with injuries last week. That's a concern against the Saints. I know they're a more balanced attack. They want to run it. You would expect Alvin Kamara, Latavius Murray to have their running back room back for this game. Drew Brees is going to have, it looks like, potentially Michael Thomas back for this game. He's designated to return from that ankle injury. He missed the final 3 games of the regular season, and this is a completely different and much more explosive and complete Saints offense with a Michael Thomas that's healthy back on the field. And it sure looks like he is going to be healthy and back on the field for this game against the Chicago Bears. And if the Bears are still banged up at Buster Screen, and some of these other guys in the secondary can't go, and it looks like Roquan Smith as well might be down and out here for the Bears in this game. That's troubling for me. You look at this New Orleans offense. You know what? I know it was Carolina last week, but to score 33 points, to have none of your regular running backs, they were all sidelined, no Michael Thomas, and they still put up 33 points against Carolina last week. That's impressive. I don't care who you're playing. That is extremely impressive. I think for the New Orleans offense, they're down 2 cornerbacks. Rodgers picked it apart. Drew Brees will as well. I know Drew Brees' arm is maybe declining a little bit, but he's shown he can still make plays, especially against a secondary that's banged up, that's struggling, that's without multiple key starters at the cornerback spot. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't talk you out of laying the points. I wouldn't. I'm not going to. It's a lean to New Orleans for me. It's a lot of points to be laying, 10, 10.5. Maybe the Saints in the first half might be worth a look. Steven, you're mentioning it. First half might be the better option. Team total over on the Saints makes a lot of sense to me. And I am still going to take a chance. I think the Saints team total, I'll have a little on that in terms of a bet. I'm also going to have a little on the full game over here at 47. The Bears overs have been cashing. I don't know if they're going to do as much of the scoring as, say, New Orleans in this game. I think New Orleans is probably going to end up doing most of the contributions to getting this game up and over the total, which is currently 47. But I still think it can get there. And keep in mind, if New Orleans gets to 28 or 31 in this game, which I think they will, and Chicago's got, let's say, 14, 17 points late in the game, and it's like 31-17 or something, or 31-14, and New Orleans is up by like 17, and it's a few minutes to go, Chicago's capable of going down the field and getting a backdoor score, a late touchdown, and getting the game over the total. And again, we've seen Chicago trending over the total. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-1 to the over, Chicago, in their last 6 games. New Orleans games have gone over the total in 3 of their last 4 games. So they have been trending over the total as well down the stretch. So right now, my strongest 2 stances is maybe look at a Saints team total over and look at the full game over 47. I just even if the Saints control the game, which I think they have the potential to, I sense this still could end up coming right down around close to where this number is, 10, 10.5. I could see a Saints 10-point win, 14-point win. I'm not convinced they'll just completely run away and hide with a 3-touchdown or more win. So that's why I'm a little reluctant to lay this many points with New Orleans. But I do think they win the game, and I do think they have success offensively. against what's a depleted Chicago defense, especially in the secondary. So I'm looking at Saints team total over and also over 47 more than anything. Lean Saints as well. All right, we'll wrap it up. Final game of Wild Card Weekend, Sunday Night Football. Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh's 5.5, 6-point home favorites. 47 the total in this game. This is some pretty bad history for Cleveland and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has won 17 straight home games against the Cleveland Browns by an average of 13.5 points per game. They've just dominated Cleveland here on this field. They destroyed Cleveland 38-7 earlier this year. Played a bunch of backups last week, with Roethlisberger out, key starters on the defensive side of the football out as well. And they still almost beat Cleveland, with Cleveland trying to obviously punch their playoff ticket. And now, to make matters worse for the Browns, obviously they're thrilled to get in the playoffs. And there's concerns with Pittsburgh. Don't get me wrong. Pittsburgh, their offense, they still can't run the ball. But they did get their passing game going the last time we saw Ben Roethlisberger in action against the Indianapolis Colts. Remember, they had success. They finally threw the ball deep, got some big touchdown strikes to Chase Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster. They finally got a little bit of a deep passing game back again. That could be good news for the Steelers going into this wild card playoff game here Sunday night against the Cleveland Browns. What's bothersome for me is not so much what Cleveland can or can't do on the field, because there's a lot of points to be giving Cleveland with the Baker Mayfield's had a pretty solid season. We know they can run the football with Nick Chubb and with Kareem Hunt. They have been an outstanding running back tandem this season for the Cleveland Browns. The big question is, can that work against the Pittsburgh defense? Lackluster performance last week, backups on the Steelers, and still struggled to put the game away. Baker Mayfield was still under a lot of pressure, sacked 4 times last week. Can you believe that? And much of that game was backups for Pittsburgh defensively against starters for the Browns offensively. And yet they still got 4 sacks against Baker Mayfield last week in that game. Now you're going to have Cameron Hayward back. Now you're going to have TJ Watt back. You're going to have all hands on deck. You're going to have that entire defensive front intact. And I think the pressure might get there again to Mayfield, because Cleveland's offensive line struggled against backups of Pittsburgh last week. That's going to be trouble. They're going to have to try to run the football, but the Steelers are pretty damn good against the run. And that's the same problem that Cleveland ran into in the first meeting against Pittsburgh, where they couldn't run they didn't have a great deal of success running the football. It became a one-dimensional offense. They had to rely on Mayfield, and then they got behind, and then the pass rush teed off on Mayfield, and that's when the game got away from Cleveland in the previous meeting this season against the Cleveland Browns. Or against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's a concern here. And to make matters worse for this Cleveland team, you got players involved in drag racing. Are you kidding me? The week before a playoff game, your first playoff game for your franchise in 19 years, and you're going to do this crap a week before the biggest game in the franchise in almost 2 decades. You've got COVID-19 issues rearing their ugly head with this team. Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, is not going to be on the sideline for this game due to COVID-19 protocols. There's a couple players as well, including their Joel, one of their key offensive linemen. It looks like Joel Bitonio may not play as well, guard for the Browns on that offensive line. So this offensive line could be shorthanded against a good defensive front. That worries me a lot going into this game as well. Not having Stefanski available. That's concerning, because it just throws off the rhythm. It throws off the practice regimen. It does all of that, and it just throws everything out of whack for a Cleveland team trying to prepare for their absolute best game or biggest game of the season, and the biggest game for the Cleveland Browns franchise, in several weeks, or the biggest game for the Cleveland Browns franchise in 2 decades when you're talking from a playoff standpoint. And for Baker Mayfield, let's not forget, it's your first playoff start. And sometimes you baptism by fire, right? Lamar Jackson had to suffer some tough losses in the playoffs. Josh Allen did as well. There's a bunch of quarterbacks that, they had to lose in the playoffs before they learned how to win. And maybe that's Baker Mayfield here in this game against Pittsburgh. Yeah, it bothers me Pittsburgh still can't run the football consistently enough, but there's just too much that concerns me on the field, matchup-wise, off the field with distractions, with COVID issues, with injuries with Cleveland right now, that I can't back Cleveland here. I would lean Pittsburgh -6. Yet I still don't love the idea of laying this many with Pittsburgh because of their swoon down the stretch where, they didn't exactly play well until they finally beat Indianapolis. And they're a flawed team as well, particularly offensively, particularly that non-existent ground game. And that could be trouble because if they can't run the football, it means Myles Garrett gets to pin their ears back on defense with that pass rush. That could be trouble for Ben and the offense. But I do think Pittsburgh wins this game at the very least. So I'm more lukewarm on laying the points with, say, Pittsburgh than with Buffalo. But I am going to go ahead with Pittsburgh as the second leg of the two-team 6-point teaser that I mentioned earlier. Buffalo is on the one leg of the two-team 6-point teaser. Buffalo down to a pick'em. And the same thing with Pittsburgh. Take them down to a pick'em. Just ask the Bills and the Steelers to win these two games straight up. I think they can do that. So I lean to Pittsburgh, but I like Pittsburgh even better on a teaser. And if you like other teams on a teaser this weekend, in the other games, you can throw Pittsburgh potentially on a teaser with one of those teams. So that's what I'm looking at. Bills Steelers teaser. I like that one quite a bit. I think Pittsburgh wins the game. I think they cover as well, but I'm just not rushing to lay 6 points here with the Pittsburgh Steelers in this game. All right, there we have it. Wild card weekend. We broke down every single game in depth. I don't know if I can give you more in-depth coverage, analysis, matchup breakdowns than that. So I did my best. We came prepared. We gave you some good numbers, good stats. I gave you all my opinions. Just to recap, I like Buffalo laying the points, and I really like the Bills on a teaser. But I'm also going to take a little small bet on Colts team total over because I find that if the Colts are going to cover this game, they're going to have to score. And I think they might because they might be able to run with it. And I like Colts Bills over for a small bet as well. I'm leaning Seattle. I haven't bet Seattle yet, but if I see -3 show up, I will pull the trigger on a small Seattle bet. Also lean under the total with Rams Seahawks. I will be on probably the Washington football team +9 against Tampa Bay. Lean under the total in that game. I do like Baltimore -3 and the over 54.5 with the Ravens and the Titans. I like the over 47 with the Bears and the Saints with a lean to the Saints. And I like the Saints team total over in that game as well. And I lean Pittsburgh Steelers -6 against Cleveland and really like the Steelers in a two-team 6-point teaser down to a pick'em. So that's what we're looking at right now in terms of my NFL opinions for wildcard weekend. Quickly before we wrap up the show, brief thoughts on the national championship game, college football, Ohio State, Alabama. Alabama 8-point favorites, 75 the total in this one. Hell no am I betting under in this game. I'm not doing it. Not with this offense, not with what we saw out of Justin Fields. And I'll say this about Alabama's offense, or sorry, their defense, I should say. The quarterbacks that have had their success against Alabama and have beaten Alabama in recent years, the common thread is they're all mobile quarterbacks. You look at them all that have beaten Alabama: Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel. You go on down the list. Deshaun Watson. All of these teams have a common thread between them. All of these quarterbacks, they can run the football with their dual threat quarterbacks. Justin Fields is as well. And that could pose a little bit of a threat here for Alabama's defense. However, on the flip side, I don't know where Ohio State got that defense, got that pass rush, got that dominance in the trenches against Clemson's offense from. I don't know where they found it because I have not been overly impressed with Ohio State's defense, secondary, or their pass rush. But boy, it was great against Clemson. Part of me thinks Clemson may not be as good as Alabama this year. That's number one. And number two, they were just beyond fired up and motivated and prepared and ready for that Clemson Tigers team after those remarks from Dabo Swinney that this is the 11th ranked team in the country we're playing. They didn't play enough games. They maybe shouldn't be in the playoff. That clearly riled up Ohio State, and they played just a hell of a football game as a result. I think it'll be much more difficult doing that here against Alabama. They've got potential absences for this game from a COVID standpoint, so severe that they actually did consider moving this game from this Monday to next Monday, January 18th, playing it a week later instead because of the issues with Ohio State. So to keep it short and sweet here, I'm not stepping in front of Alabama. And the Alabama Crimson Tide have now cashed 8 straight first half wagers. They have covered the number in the first half in 8 straight games. That to me is the way to go. Because it could get dicey in terms of the full game spread, much like we saw with the Alabama Notre Dame semifinal in the Rose Bowl. They didn't cover the full game number, but they did cover the first half. So Alabama in that -4.5 range in the first half, that is a bet that I will be on here in the national championship game. I lean to Alabama full game as well. And I might even get there with the over in this game at 75. I think it's a shootout. And I think, to me, to say that these two teams, can they get 35 apiece or 38 apiece? If they get to 38, both of these teams, the game will go over the total. I think Alabama for sure is getting 38-42 in this game against Ohio State. I'm not buying into Ohio State's defense just after that one game against Clemson. I'm not. They're going to have to show it to me again. I don't think they're going to be as good on that side of the ball here in this one. Their secondary, look, their secondary is, to me, very, very suspect outside of Wade, who's a great cornerback. Other than that, I think Ohio State's secondary is not that great. There's just too many receivers. Oh, and Alabama could get Jalen Waddle back, as if they need another weapon in this passing game for Mac Jones, and yet they might get him back here for this game. So, yeah, I'm leaning over. I'm leaning Alabama full game. I definitely 100%, no ifs, ands, or buts, or maybes with this one. I absolutely will be on Alabama first half around -4.5 and see if they can make it 9 straight Alabama Crimson Tide first half spread winners. I think it's very potential that ends up coming to fruition. All right, there we go. We're wrapping it up. That's this edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy right here on Pub Sports Radio for Thursday, January 7th. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. And again, this show, we're down to the bitter end, unfortunately. We've only got a few of these Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy shows left. We're going to have 3 more left. Divisional weekend, Conference Championship weekend, and then, of course, Super Bowl weekend. We'll be previewing those games the next 3 Thursdays, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. So we've only got 3 shows remaining this season here with Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, but definitely looking forward to the NFL playoffs starting this weekend, and I'm sure all of you guys are as well. Thanks for watching. Reminder to keep checking out everything here at Pub Sports Radio. It's not just the shows I'm on. Check out Razor Sharp and the Horse guys betting the horse racing live at night. Check out the MMA folks with Boston Nick and Mo and everybody that does the MMA content, and also the people that join in on the live betting shows at night during NFL games or whatever else might be going on in the sports world, college football, NBA, etc. Make sure you're checking out all the personalities, all the shows, and all the content on a daily basis right here on Pub Sports Radio. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great weekend. Enjoy Super NFL Wildcard Weekend. Enjoy the games and good luck. Cash some tickets, and I'll be back with you next Thursday for another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy right here on Pub Sports Radio.